They told me the money for my college was gone, just like that. No explanation, no warning. My entire future erased in a single sentence. It happened on a Sunday that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, the kind of quiet afternoon when the whole neighborhood seems to hold its breath, and even the sparrows outside the kitchen window hop along the fence with a certain restraint, like they've been warned not to make noise. My acceptance letter was still taped to the wall by the phone, curling at the edges from the steam that rose every morning when my mother boiled water for oatmeal. The embossed crest caught the light and flashed back at me like a dare I had already accepted, a proof of escape I could point to whenever the town's air turned stale or a classmate's smirk suggested that people like us only ever left for a weekend and always came back. I had told myself that I would be different, and for years that belief had a structure, a scaffold, a series of numbers in an account my parents called the college fund. I grew up with its presence the way children grow up near a lighthouse they've never climbed, certain the beam will be there when the fog rolls in, certain it exists for them. Then my father leaned back, placed his mug down with such unceremonious finality that a drop of coffee slid down the rim and made a brown comma on the table, and he said, not cruelly but without ceremony, "The money's gone." At first I thought he meant the money for this month's utilities, or the windfall we were waiting on from a tax return, or some small buffer that lubricated the friction of our bills. But the way my mother tensed, the way her fingers stayed flattened against the laminated placemat as if she were pressing a secret into the wood, told me I had misheard, or that I had heard exactly right. The word gone had a strange solidity to it, like a metal gate slamming, like a lock in place. It wasn't the kind of word you used for a complicated situation that could be discussed and sorted out. It was the kind of word you used for a house fire viewed from the curb, for a ship once visible on the horizon that has slipped beneath it and won't be seen again. I looked from my father's narrowed eyes to my mother's lowered lashes, and something inside me tried to reorder the last 10 years of my life, to relabel moments I thought were generous or prudent or loving as warning signs I had refused to read. I would like and market movement, and a decision that had seemed reasonable at the time. He spoke like a man who had already given this speech to himself, and found a way to live with its inadequacy. My mother didn't speak at all. She adopted a posture I recognized from church, reverent, blank, untouchable, as if a confession were inches away, but she had closed the confessional. It wasn't just the absence of answers that gutted me. It was the absence of a shared reality. I felt like I was pounding on the glass of an aquarium, watching the people who had raised me drift away like silent fish. This is the part where I tell you about my dream. Not because I think my dream is unique, but because I need you to understand the exact shape of what was taken. Since I was little, I had planned my escape by stitching together other people's lives. I collected stories the way some kids collect ticket stubs, piecing them into a vision of the girl I would become. There was my cousin in Boston who talked about reading until 2 a.m. in a library that looked like a cathedral, and the alum who had come back to our high school to talk about how a professor challenged her to write essays with teeth. I kept their words in a notebook with a cracked blue spine and taught myself that where you start and where you end are not obligated to shake hands. The college fund made that belief not just pretty, but plausible. It was the bridge I had been told we were building together from this side to that one. My parents' mantra was a simple ledger: study hard, keep your head down, save. When friends invited me to lake parties, my mother would smile and say, "Your time will come," and I would hear a promise ringing behind it, a bell only I could hear. Now, as my father excused himself to take a call that wasn't ringing, and my mother examined the pattern of the tablecloth like it held the coordinates to a life raft, I worried about smaller, crueler things. I worried about the college counselor who had clapped me on the shoulder and called me a first-generation miracle. I worried about the girl from AP Chem who said she would see me on move-in day and asked if I wanted to coordinate rugs, and how I would explain the mess I was suddenly wearing like a stain. I worried about student loan calculators and part-time jobs that would turn me into a tired approximation of myself, and the feeling that my hard-earned acceptance letter might be reduced of envelopes the bank had mailed for years. The statements were there, neatly arranged, recent ones on top, the sense of adult responsibility radiating from their ordered edges, And for the briefest moment, I thought that this too must be a horrible misunderstanding that a quick audit could fix. I sat down with a pen, the same pen I had used a week earlier to write a thank you note to a scholarship committee for a sum that wouldn't have covered the lab fees but had made me feel seen, and began to scan. At first glance, the pages had the crisp neutrality of a hospital corridor. Dates, amounts, a ledger of dull predictability. But the more closely I traced the lines, the more that neutrality felt staged. There were gaps that should have been crowded with life. Quiet stretches where you'd expect the small daily transactions of a family like ours. It was the silence between numbers that unnerved me, a silence that didn't fit the sound our lives made. I have gone back 100 times in my mind to that moment when the wrongness crystallized. It wasn't a single red flag so much as the sensation of walking into a room you've cleaned and sensing an object has been moved. The statement for January had a tidy series of deposits from my part-time job and a transfer from my father's paycheck. Then nothing that would trouble a banker's sleep. February looked almost identical, which was odd in its own right. March made a similar effort to appear boring. The patterns were too smooth, like a song remixed until all the drums were the same volume. Even before I knew the right questions to ask, my body understood that the account had been groomed. I felt as if I had been handed an alibi that was almost perfect and therefore suspicious. My father returned to the table and said we could figure out a plan, that the school I wanted was expensive and we had always known we might need to be realistic. And the word realistic skittered across the surface of my anger like a dead leaf on water. Realistic had never been the point. The point had been a promise. I kept flipping pages while my parents rehearsed a conversation they'd plainly practiced, sentences that ran along rails toward forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. I asked again when the money had been withdrawn and where it had gone, and my mother finally said costs, a plural that sounded as though it could house anything. Medical bills, surrender. I told myself that if the money was gone, I would find where it had gone. Not because I thought I could pull it back by the collar, but because I needed the dignity of a true narrative. I began to search the house in a way that would have embarrassed me if I had been thinking about dignity. I pulled out drawers and slid my hands to the very back where dust bunnies lived like tribes. I climbed on a chair in the laundry room and felt along the top shelf where we kept the beach towels, even though we hadn't been to the beach in years. I inspected the shoebox in my parents' closet that had once held Christmas ornaments and now held a failed attempt at a budget system with color-coded index cards. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find. I only knew that people who dealt in the truth did not torch the evidence of it, and the smell of something scorched had begun to rise from the edges of our conversation. The house, which had always been a story I could read with my eyes closed, became a puzzle that refused to offer an edge piece. I could feel my mother moving about the kitchen with almost ceremonial purpose, rinsing a glass that didn't need rinsing, wiping a surface that didn't need wiping, the choreography of guilt performed for an audience of one. By late afternoon, my patience had melted into a thick, humming focus, the kind that sometimes took me in exams when the clock grew loud and the corridor outside filled with footsteps, and still I could hold a line of thought like a lit wire. I returned to the kitchen because it was the room where the silence kept nosing at me, and because I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer would be close to the place where the damage had been declared. The junk drawer by the fridge resisted when I tugged, the wooden face stuttering against the cabinet frame as if something inside had shifted position and wedged itself into defiance. I pulled harder, and the whole drawer lurched forward and threatened to fall, the loose collection of batteries and rubber bands and takeout menus skidding to the front. That was when I noticed the thin strip of paper crushed and curled against the back lip. The edge of it caught like a torn shirt on a nail. It was the wrong color for an old receipt, too bright a white beneath the smears, and the sides were not worn soft by time, but crisp and charred, as if a flame had licked them and then been smothered by a sudden, cowardly breath. I eased the drawer the rest of the way out and set it on the counter, ignoring my mother's was a transfer slip. The bank's logo perched officiously at the top. The date printed in a small, precise font that landed like a gavel. The amount large enough to make me feel suddenly, viscerally short of breath. The line for the authorizing signature had been filled with a hand I knew the way I knew my own. The slight slant, the confident looping M, that had signed birthday cards and school forms and doctor's papers all my life. My mother's name looked at me from the page with the shameless calm of ink. Beneath it, the account numbers leapt up with ugly familiarity. I didn't need to be an expert to read what I was holding. Money had been moved from the account my parents had spent a decade calling my future into an account I didn't recognize. Someone had tried to set this proof on fire and then, for reasons I could not yet pass, had stopped partway through and shoved it where a hand with a purpose might one day find it. The room leaned around me, as if the house itself had heard a confession and didn't know where to stand. I felt the heat rise into my face. Not the quick flush of embarrassment, but the deep, slow burn of a truth setting in. There is a moment in every betrayal when the story shifts from theory to artifact, and as I looked at the blackened edges of that paper, I understood that whatever narrative my parents were rehearsing could no longer be safely performed. My mother had made a decision, and then she had tried to erase its footprint. She had not just failed to guard my future. She had handled it with the deliberateness of someone sliding a key into a lock, turning, and walking away. I heard my father say my name in a tone that pretended to be soothing and landed like a warning, and I heard my mother whisper, "Please," a word that skittered across the counter and hid under a sponge. I did not look up. I traced the numbers again and again, as if they might change format under pressure, as if repetition could make the math different, but the arithmetic held. When I finally raised my eyes, my mother was staring at the space of air just to the right of my shoulder, the way you look at a haunted corner because the ghost won't meet your gaze. The muscles in her jaw worked as if she were chewing a word. Carry such a burden. I wanted to throw the slip at her feet like a gauntlet, to demand a list of exactly who had demanded this sacrifice and what she had received in exchange for my future. But another instinct rose, older and sharper. Keep the evidence, keep your clarity, keep moving. If I shattered now, I would be picking up pieces for years. I slid the transfer slip into the pocket of my sweatshirt and felt the brittle edges press against my heart. I told my parents I was going for a walk, though what I needed was a geography larger than our rooms, a place where the air could carry the weight of what I now knew. My mother took a half step toward me as if to reclaim the paper, then stopped and folded her hands again as if folding them could rewind time. I reached for the drawer to push it back in and noticed, almost as an afterthought, the faint impression of another slip's corner still wedged beneath the track, as if the one I held was not the only one to have flirted with fire. The half-burned receipt in my pocket bore my mother's signature, and a sum large enough to rewrite my life. And as I stepped onto the porch into the thin gold of evening, one question seared through the first cool breath. If this was the proof I had found by accident, what had she hidden on purpose? Why would my mom hide proof of money transfers if she swore the account was empty? The night I found that first charred slip, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed with the paper tucked in the pocket of my hoodie, my fingers brushing over it again and again, as if contact alone could confirm it was real. The numbers were etched into my mind now, glowing like neon whenever I closed my eyes, the betrayal more tangible with each breath I took. My room, which had always been the one place I could shut out the world, felt contaminated by the discovery. The posters of bands I loved, the stacks of books on the floor, the notebook full of college application drafts, all of it looked smaller, like props on a stage where the real story was playing out somewhere else. My mother's signature haunted me, stark and unapologetic, and every time I thought of it, my chest tightened with the sick certainty that the truth was worse than anything they had told me. By morning, the hunger for answers had overtaken the exhaustion. My parents acted as if nothing had happened. My father left for work with his pocket open with both hands. The junk spilled forward, packets of soy sauce, a dead battery, an old flashlight that worked only when smacked against the counter. I emptied the entire drawer onto the table and tipped it, shaking out every hidden corner. That was when I saw them. More slips, not just one, wedged deep against the back wall. They were folded and tucked as if someone had shoved them in haste. My heart pounded as I pulled them free. The stack wasn't large, but it was enough to change everything. 5 slips, each with the bank's familiar logo, each signed in my mother's hand. Some edges were smudged with ash like the first one, others crisp and untouched, but every single one was damning. I spread them out on the table, the amounts swimming before my eyes. They weren't one-off mistakes. They weren't small transfers to cover emergencies. These were deliberate, calculated withdrawals of large sums, spread out over the course of months. The dates alone were a gut punch. March, May, July, September. Each month aligned not with family milestones or emergencies, but with moments I could map onto my own life. March, when my guidance counselor had congratulated me for being a finalist for a merit scholarship. May, when I'd been offered a summer internship at a local law office. July, when we'd toured the university campus and my parents had insisted on treating me to dinner, my mother raising a glass and saying, "This is the beginning." September, when I'd filled out my FAFSA with her sitting beside me, nodding at every line like she was proud of how careful I'd been. Behind every transfer was a memory of encouragement, of love, of reassurance, and behind each of those, I now saw a shadow. The amounts were too high to explain away. Thousands of dollars, withdrawn with an almost rhythmic regularity. None of our bills matched those numbers. Our house was modest, our cars old but functional, our vacations non-existent. We weren't wealthy, but we had always lived simply, never extravagantly, and there had never been talk of crushing debt. These weren't expenses for our survival. This was something else entirely, something bigger. The longer I stared, the more the room seemed to close in on me. My chest tightened as if the air itself was conspiring against me. It wasn't just the betrayal of losing the money anymore. It was the realization that my mother hadn't slipped. Flash there, panic, quickly buried under a layer of practiced calm. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice steady but too smooth, like glass stretched thin over a crack. "These are transfers," I pressed, my hand trembling as I lifted one. "Your signature is on them." Thousands of dollars, over and over again. Her jaw tightened, but she shook her head. "You don't understand what you're looking at." The sting of her words burned hotter than the betrayal itself. Imagining things, as if I were a child inventing monsters under the bed, not a young woman holding physical proof of her lies. It wasn't just that she had stolen from me. It was that she was trying to rewrite my reality, to make me doubt what I could plainly see. I could feel the gaslight flickering, that terrible manipulation that makes you question your own mind, and it made me want to scream. "Don't do this," I whispered. "Don't make me doubt myself." My voice cracked, and I hated the weakness in it. But more than that, I hated that she just stood there, saying nothing, as if silence could erase the truth. I gathered the slips, holding them so tightly the paper crumpled in my fist, and stormed into my room. I spread them across my desk, lining them up in order, studying the amounts and the dates again and again as if repetition would unlock the code. The numbers didn't make sense. There was no corresponding bill, no purchase, no medical emergency that could explain why the money had trickled out this way. It was almost like the money had been funneled into something else, something deliberately concealed. And then I saw it, the detail that made my breath catch. The last slip was different from the others. It didn't just list the amount and the date. Beneath the account number, in smaller print, was a notation, a name. Not my father's, not mine, not even my mother's. A name I didn't recognize, and next to it a location, another city. I stared at that slip until my eyes blurred, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room felt like it tilted, the floor shifting beneath me as if the world itself was trying to unseat me. Who was this person? Why was my mother transferring money to them? And why in a city none of us had any connection to? The betrayal deepened into something sharper, almost unbearable. It was no longer about testing the sound of it like a curse. I knew one thing for certain. Whoever this person was, they were the reason my future had been stolen, and I was going to find out why. I told myself it was just a name, but it felt like a map someone wanted me to find. The slip sat on my desk like a glowing ember, burning into my skin every time my fingers brushed over the edges. The name printed there wasn't familiar, Not a teacher, not a neighbor, not some distant relative my mother occasionally mentioned in passing. It was foreign, alien, carrying the weight of someone who had no business being tethered to the lifeline I'd been promised since childhood. And then there was the location, an address in a city I had never set foot in, 2 hours away, marked with a precision that made my stomach churn. I had turned the slip over a dozen times, half expecting a hidden message to reveal itself, but the truth remained printed on its face. Someone else had been entrusted with the money that was supposed to shape my future. All through the night, I tried to convince myself it was a dead end, a clerical mistake, a coincidence. But the longer I stared at the letters of that stranger's name, the more it felt deliberate, as if my mother had left breadcrumbs behind, either by accident or intention, daring me to follow. By dawn, my mind was made up. I couldn't sit in homeroom, pretending to care about calculus proofs or the symbolism in the scarlet letter. Not when the real proof was sitting in my drawer, begging me to act. For the first time in my life, I skipped school. I slipped the slips into a folder and tucked it under my jacket, heart pounding as I walked past the bus stop and instead headed for the train station. Every step felt like rebellion, but also necessity. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen, piece by piece, until I no longer recognized my own future. The weight of betrayal pressed heavy in my chest, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, I would find an explanation that made sense, that restored even a fraction of the trust I had lost. The city rose in the distance like a wall of glass and concrete, too tall and too shiny for someone like me, who was used to cracked sidewalks and houses that leaned with age. I clutched my backpack straps tighter as I walked from the station, the address grown unassuming, nestled between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The glass door was streaked with fingerprints, the logo on the window sun-faded. It didn't look like the kind of place my mother would trust was something as important as my college fund. But the slip didn't lie. This was it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and copier ink. A row of chairs sagged under the weight of waiting customers, and the carpet was a muted gray that had long since given up trying to look new. I approached the counter, clutching the slip in my hand. The teller, a woman with sharp glasses and a polite but tired smile, asked how she could help me. My voice wavered as I slid the slip forward, pointing at the account numbers. "I need to ask about this transfer," I said, my throat dry. Her smile faltered slightly. She adjusted her glasses, typing something quickly into the computer, her eyes scanning the screen. Then, just as quickly, her expression shuddered. She slid the slip back toward me and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said in a voice so rehearsed it could have been recorded. "I can't disclose any information. Authorized parties only." The words felt like a door slamming in my face. Authorized only. That phrase reverberated through me, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper. I was the reason that account had existed. I was the future it had been built for. And now I was being told I didn't even have permission to know where my own life savings had gone. "I'm her daughter," I blurted, desperation rising like a flood. "This was my college fund. I just want to know why it was transferred. Please." The teller's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but then she shook her head again, her voice firmer this time. "I understand, but rules are rules. I could lose my job if I shared any details. You'll need to talk directly to the account holder." The account holder. The words hit like a slap. My mother was the account holder. My mother, who had told me the money was gone. My mother, who had signed the slips, burned the evidence, and still dared to look me in the eye at breakfast as if nothing had happened. I felt like a child standing on the wrong side of a glass wall, pressing my face against it while the people inside carried on their lives, oblivious to the girl watching everything collapse. I gathered the slips, my hands trembling as I shoved them back into the folder. My chest was tight, my vision swimming. Around me, people went about their uncover. My throat ached with unshed tears, but I refused to cry in front of strangers. Not here. Not when I still had no answer. As I pushed the door open, the city's noise rushed back at me. Honking cars, the rumble of buses, the hum of voices blending into a background roar. I stepped onto the sidewalk, my head down, trying to decide whether to head back to the train or wander the streets and then I felt it, a pair of eyes on me. I glanced up, and there she was, a woman standing just across the street, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. She wasn't pretending to people watch or glancing casually. She was staring at me, For a moment, I froze, clutching the folder tighter, my heart racing. She was middle-aged, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, her clothes businesslike but not flashy. There was something unsettling in the way her eyes seemed to recognize me, as if she already knew who I was, as if she had been waiting for me to walk out of that building. I tore my gaze away, telling myself it was nothing, that she was just another stranger. But when I looked back, she was still staring, unmoving. Her eyes locked on mine with a look that sent a chill crawling up my spine. And in that instant, I knew. Whatever my mother was hiding, I wasn't the only one who knew about it. Someone else was watching me, and they already seemed to know exactly who I was. She looked at me the way strangers don't, like she already knew my story. The woman across the street didn't blink. Her stare was steady, deliberate, and far too pointed to be coincidence. People in this city glance, maybe linger for a beat too long, but then their eyes slip away, pulled by their own errands and distractions. This woman didn't. She studied me like I was a page in a book she had read before, like my face confirmed something she already suspected. I froze there on the sidewalk, the folder pressed tight against my chest, caught between fear and curiosity. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to disappear into the crowd, but the tighter her gaze held mine, the more I felt pulled toward her, as if she was the next step in a trail I hadn't realized I would shoes on the sidewalk. Then she stopped. Without turning, she stepped into the alcove of a doorway and waited, her arms folded, as if she had known all along I would follow. When I reached her, my heart hammering, she spoke before I could open my mouth. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was low, controlled, the kind of tone used by people who know more than they're willing to share. "I just want to know what's happening," I said, holding up the slip as if it were proof of my right to demand answers. Why was my mother's name on these? Why is money being moved into accounts I've never heard of? Who are you? Her eyes flicked to the slip, then back to me, and something almost like pity softened her features for a second. But then she shook her head. "Stop digging," she said firmly. "Your mother did what she had to do." The words landed like a blow. Did what she had to do. As if stealing my college fund and hiding the evidence was some noble sacrifice, a decision born of necessity rather than betrayal. My chest tightened, anger flaring up hot and fast. "What does that even mean?" I demanded. "She lied to me. She told me the money was gone. I had plans, I had a future, and she burned it down. You expect me to believe that was for my own good?" The woman didn't flinch. She studied me with the detached calm of someone who had rehearsed this conversation before. "You're too young to understand what's at stake," she said. "Sometimes protecting someone doesn't look like love. Sometimes it looks like betrayal." I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Protecting me? How was I supposed to believe that emptying my college fund, my one ticket out of the small-town trap, had anything to do with protection? "She ruined everything," I whispered, the words tasting like ashes. The woman's expression flickered, guilt, maybe, or resignation, but she quickly masked it. "You think you see the whole picture," she said softly, "but you don't. And if you keep pushing, you're going to find out more than you want to know." Her calmness rattled me. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it felt heavier than a warning. My pulse thudded in my ears. Part of me wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake the truth out of her, demand the answers. When she withdrew her hand, it wasn't a weapon. It was a small piece of folded paper. She held it out toward me, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Take this," she murmured, "but be careful. Every answer leads to another question, and not all of them are safe." I hesitated, staring at the paper. The air between us was electric, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, I reached out and took it. The note was small, folded into a tight square, the paper warm from her hand. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She met my eyes one last time, her gaze steady, almost sorrowful. "Ask about the education trust." And then she turned and walked away, her footsteps brisk, purposeful. Within seconds, she disappeared into the crowd at the end of the block, leaving me clutching the folded note as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. I stood frozen, the city moving around me in a blur. The words echoed in my mind. Ask about the education trust. They tasted heavy, dangerous, like a secret code I wasn't meant to hear. And as I unfolded the note, my hands trembling, I realized that my mother's betrayal was only the surface of a much deeper story, one that had already reached into my life without my permission, and one that was far from over. I thought I was following the money, turns out. I was stepping into something much darker. The slip had given me a name. The woman outside the credit union had given me a warning. But the folded note she pressed into my hand, that was different. Those words carried weight, like a locked door with my name written on it. Ask about the education trust. The phrase followed me home, clinging to me through the rattle of the train, the long walk from the station, and the silence of my bedroom where the walls now felt like strangers. I kept repeating it under my breath, trying to figure out if it was a charity, a scholarship program, or just another excuse my mother could hide behind. But the more I said it, the darker it sounded, like a kind of trap disguised as a gift. I started where anyone would, online. I opened my laptop, the blue light stinging my tired eyes, and typed the words into the search bar. At first, results poured in that looked clean, professional.
Awarded, success stories or annual reports. This had none of that. Just carefully crafted language meant to look legitimate while saying almost nothing. The deeper I scrolled, the thinner the information became, until the links led to broken pages or sites that had clearly been taken down. It felt like chasing shadows. I pushed the laptop away, frustration boiling inside me. If this trust fund really existed, where was the proof? Where were the students whose lives had supposedly been changed by it? My eyes drifted back to the slips spread across my desk. My mother's transfers hadn't been accidents. They had gone somewhere deliberate. And if the education trust was part of it, then maybe this was where the money had been funneled. The next day at school, I tested the waters. Between classes, I asked a few classmates if they'd ever heard of the Education Trust Fund. Most shrugged, confused, but one girl, Amber, whose brother had graduated the year before, gave me a look that lingered too long. "My mom doesn't like to talk about it," she muttered. "Something about my brother's scholarship getting messed up." Before I could press her for details, the bell rang, and she disappeared into the crowd. That single exchange stuck with me. It wasn't just my family. Other people in town had been touched by this shadowy fund. Other families had lost money too. The realization made my stomach drop. This wasn't a private betrayal. It was part of something bigger, something woven into the fabric of the community without anyone daring to say it out loud. That night I confronted my father. He was in his chair, the television flickering across his face, when I dropped the slips on the coffee table and demanded answers. "What do you know about the Education Trust?" I asked. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Where did you hear that?" His tone was sharp, defensive, and it only confirmed what I already suspected. He knew exactly what I was talking about. "A woman told me," I said, folding my arms, "outside the credit union. She said Mom did what she had to do. What does that mean? What is this fund? Why is our money in it?" He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Already destroyed everything. I left the house in a fury, the cool night air burning against my skin. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them sitting on the couch while my father begged me to stay ignorant. There was one place left where I might find the truth: the town library. Its archives went back decades. Stacks of old newspapers and records preserved on microfilm, untouched by the gloss of carefully curated websites. If the Education Trust had roots here, the paper trail would be buried there. The library was nearly empty when I arrived, its high ceilings echoing with the faint shuffle of the librarian's steps. I slipped into the back corner where the archive machines hummed quietly, the smell of dust and old paper wrapping around me like a cloak. I typed in the keywords, and waited as the reels spun, projecting headlines across the glowing screen. Most of the early results were the same fluff I'd seen online. Press releases about community initiatives, vague stories about opportunity and hope. But then I found it. A headline buried in the local paper from nearly a decade ago. The bold letters jumped out at me, and my breath caught in my throat. Funds mismanaged in community education program. Investigation dropped. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, scanning the small print beneath. The article described how thousands of dollars had gone missing from a community education initiative, money that was supposed to be earmarked for local students. There had been whispers of corruption, of funds siphoned off into places they didn't belong. But the investigation had fizzled out. No charges, no accountability. Just a quiet burial under layers of bureaucratic excuses. My pulse quickened as I read the names listed in the article. Committee members, program coordinators, and there, halfway down the page, was a name I knew all too well. My mother's. She had once chaired the scholarship committee. She had been part of the very program accused of mishandling funds. The world tilted, the library spinning around me. This wasn't just about bad luck or a private family mistake. My mother hadn't just hidden a few transfers. She had been at the center of something much larger, something that had reached into the lives of other families, stealing their futures too. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the headline in bold letters. Funds mismanaged in community education program, investigation dropped. And beneath it, my mother's name, listed like a scar carved into history. She hadn't just been a bystander. She had chaired the committee, presided over the very program that had siphoned away futures, not only mine, but countless others. The thought of her signing off on those decisions, while tucking me into bed, while telling me to work hard for the life she claimed she wanted for me, was unbearable. By the next morning, the walls of my house felt too small. My mother hummed quietly in the kitchen as she made coffee. My father buried his face in the newspaper, and I couldn't stand to sit across from them pretending to eat toast when every fiber of me wanted to slam the clipping down on the table and scream. Instead, I shoved my books into my bag and left early for school, my pulse buzzing with restless anger. I wasn't expecting anyone at school to notice. I had gotten good at keeping my head down, blending in, letting my turmoil churn beneath the surface while on the outside, I looked like every other exhausted scene. But in English class, I caught my teacher, Mrs. Carter, watching me more closely than usual. She was the kind of teacher students actually respected. Tough, but fair. The type who pushed you until you thought you might break, and then surprised you by showing up at your game or your play, cheering from the sidelines. She had been my favorite for years, a quiet anchor. That morning, her gaze lingered on me a beat too long when she handed back my essay. "Stay after class," she murmured, not a request. I tried to shake off the unease as the lesson dragged on, but my mind wasn't on the Great Gatsby or the lecture about the American dream. My eyes kept darting to the clock, my stomach knotting tighter with each passing minute. When the bell finally rang and the rest of the class shuffled out, Mrs. Carter closed the door behind them, the sound of it clicking shut louder than it should have been. She didn't waste time. "I know you've been asking questions," she said, folding her arms. Her voice was low, measured, like someone stepping carefully onto thin ice. My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" Her eyes softened with something almost like pity. "About the education trust. About your mother." The world tilted again. Carter's eyes didn't leave mine. "I'm saying she was on that committee when the money went missing. Other families fought, begged, tried to hold people accountable. They were ruined. But your mother, somehow she walked away clean. Do you understand what that looks like from the outside?" I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. I had wanted answers, but hearing them out loud felt like being stabbed in the back twice over. My mother hadn't just lied to me. She had stood at the center of the storm and let others drown while she stayed afloat. "She told me the money was gone," I whispered half to myself. She looked me in the eye and said it was gone, like it just disappeared. Mrs. Carter shook her head. "Money doesn't disappear. It moves, and when it moves, someone decides where it goes." The room blurred for a moment, my vision hot with unshed tears. My whole body shook with the rage of it, the injustice.
All those nights I'd spent studying while my friends went out. All the sacrifices I'd made because my mother promised the fund was sacred. And all along she had been tied to the very machine that chewed up other kids' futures and spat them out. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally, my voice trembling. "Why now?" For the first time, her expression cracked. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, lowering her voice even further. "Because I don't think you're safe dancing around this anymore. If you found something, if you're digging into this, people are going to notice. And the truth is, I don't think your mother's the only one with something to hide." Her words sent a shiver crawling up my spine. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small black flash drive. She held it in her palm like it was a fragile relic. "Years ago, when I was still trying to understand what happened, your mother emailed me some files. Committee documents. I don't think she meant to send them to me. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was desperate to share with someone she trusted. I've kept them all this time, thinking they might matter one day." She pressed the drive into my hand. "I think that day is now." The plastic felt cold against my skin, heavier than it should have been. I stared at it, my mind racing. Evidence. Proof. Not just rumors or whispers or gaslit denials, but
Warning clung to me as I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, the weight of it pulling me down. I felt like I had just been handed a live wire, buzzing with secrets too big for my hands to hold. My mother's lies, the community's silence, the program that promised opportunity but delivered ruin. It was all tangled together. And now the key to unraveling it sat in my pocket, daring me to plug it in. As I left her classroom, my pulse racing, the hallways seemed narrower than usual, the faces of my classmates blurring into shadows. I couldn't tell if I was walking toward answers or deeper into a labyrinth designed to swallow me whole. But one thing was certain, I wasn't alone in this anymore. Someone else had seen the cracks in my mother's story. Someone else had kept the evidence hidden away, waiting for me to stumble upon it. And as the flash drive burned against my thigh with every step, I knew that the truth wasn't just waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to consume me. I thought I was opening a folder of boring spreadsheets. Instead, I opened a door to betrayal. The flash drive weighed heavier in my pocket than it should have. All day it felt like a live current humming against my leg, a secret pressing itself into my skin, daring me to open it. I could barely focus through the monotony of classes, my teachers' voices blending into a meaningless drone. By the time I walked home, the air felt sharper, the houses on my street unfamiliar, as if the whole world had shifted slightly out of alignment. My mother's car was in the driveway, and a jolt of panic shot through me. I couldn't risk her seeing what I'd been given, so instead of heading inside, I circled around the block until she left again, her taillights disappearing into the evening. Only then did I slip into the house, my hands already trembling with anticipation. I locked myself in my room, shutting the curtains and setting my laptop on the desk. The flash drive looked ordinary, almost innocent, as I held it between my fingers. But I knew better. Nothing about this was ordinary anymore. I plugged it in, my heart pounding, the screen lighting up as the files appeared. At first glance, it was exactly what I had expected. Scrolled further, the pit in my stomach deep. The transactions didn't stop after the scandal supposedly died, after the investigation had been dropped. They continued, quietly, regularly, like a heartbeat in the shadows. And at the center of it all was my mother's name. She hadn't walked away untouched. She had stayed, her fingerprints all over the money trail. I leaned back, my chest heaving. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it in black and white. My mother hadn't just been careless or unlucky. She had been complicit, maybe even orchestrating. And if the transfers had continued this long, then whatever this education trust claimed to be, it was still alive. I forced myself to keep digging, moving from the spreadsheets into the email folder.
That's when the ground shifted beneath me. The emails were dated across years, threads of correspondence with names I didn't recognize. But one stood out immediately. Every few messages, tucked into conversations about budgets or upcoming committee meetings, there was a reply from an address labeled only as Phoenix.Director. My pulse quickened as I clicked the first one. The language was cryptic but firm. Allocate the funds as discussed. Discretion is paramount. Remember what's at stake. At first, I thought it was just another bureaucrat using a strange alias. But the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't some minor official. This was someone giving orders. And my mother wasn't resisting. She was responding. Her replies were short, careful. Understood. Transfer completed. Reports adjusted per your instruction. Every line was like a knife, cutting deeper. She wasn't just following the rules of a broken system. She was in direct communication with whoever this Phoenix director was. I scrolled further, my heart hammering, and the messages grew darker. The others are asking questions. We may need to silence the noise before it grows. And my mother's response: I'll handle the committee. They trust me. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, manipulation. My mother wasn't even simple corruption. It was something bigger, something hidden, protected, fed by the futures of kids like me who had trusted their families, their schools, their community. I wanted to believe there was still an explanation, some way to make sense of it. But then I clicked on the last email in the folder. The subject line was blank, the body short, almost hurried. My eyes scanned the words and the blood drained from my face. If your daughter finds out, everything falls apart. I stared at the screen, my hands numb, the room closing in around me. The words seared into my mind, undeniable proof that they knew. Not just about the money, not just about the program, about me. They had planned for my ignorance, they had banked on my silence, and now, by prying open this folder, I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And as the glow of the laptop bathed my face in cold light, I realized the betrayal wasn't just in the past. It was still happening, still alive, and I had just announced myself as a threat to it. It's one thing to suspect your mom is lying. It's another to prove it by breaking into her locked home office. After I read that last email on the flash drive, I couldn't stop shaking. The words burned in my head like fire. If your daughter finds out, everything falls apart. My mother's betrayal wasn't an accident or a slip of judgment. It was deliberate, ongoing, and connected to something that had my name threaded through it like a curse. That was when I realized I couldn't stop with what the flash drive had given me. I needed more, something that connected the numbers and the names to the woman sitting across from me at the dinner table, pouring coffee as if she hadn't been dismantling my life behind closed doors. The problem was, those closed doors were literal. My mother had a home office at the back of the house, a room that always remained locked. Growing up, I'd never questioned it. She claimed it was where she kept important files, bills, tax forms, the kind of things kids weren't supposed to mess with. But now, with everything I had uncovered, that locked door wasn't just a precaution. It was a vault. I spent the next few days watching her carefully. She only went into the office late at night, after she face, and dragged me into something dangerous enough that strangers were warning me in alleys. Whatever loyalty I owed her had been broken long before I ever touched that doorknob. One evening, when both my parents left for a dinner meeting, I finally made my move. My hands shook as I crouched in front of the office door, a bobby pin clutched between my fingers. I'd watched enough tutorials online to know how to jimmy a simple lock, but my heart still thundered as if I were breaking into Fort Knox. After a few tense minutes, there was a soft click, and the knob turned in my hand. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room smelled faintly of paper and ink, a different air than the rest of the house, heavier somehow, like secrets had soaked into the carpet. A desk sat against the far wall, neat on the surface, but I could see stacks of papers tucked into drawers, boxes lined up against the walls, a shredder humming quietly in the corner. This wasn't a casual workspace. It was a command center. I moved quickly, aware that every second was borrowed time. The first drawer I opened was filled with bank slips, just like the ones I'd already found, but even more. Dozens of them, stacked and organized in envelopes labeled with dates. My breath caught as I flipped through them. The amounts were staggering, the transfers constant. Each slip was like another knife in my back, proof that my mother hadn't just stolen once, but over and over again. The second drawer was worse. Inside were folders with account numbers I didn't recognize. Some were handwritten on sticky notes, others typed neatly on official documents. I copied them down as fast as I could, my fingers trembling, knowing I didn't have the resources to decode them, but unable to leave them untouched. These weren't just personal accounts. They looked like shells, placeholders designed to move money around without leaving fingerprints. And then there was the shredder bin. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just scraps, but something pulled me closer. I knelt on the floor and lifted handfuls of shredded paper, the strips curling and falling through my fingers. Most were useless fragments, half a sentence here, a number there. But as I sifted, I noticed patterns, pieces that looked like they could.
Betrayal was tied to the idea of keeping me safe. My breath hitched as I sat back, the fragments scattered around me like shards of glass. What did safety mean in this context? Safe from what, or from who? Was my mother protecting me, or had she entangled me in something I couldn't escape? The guilt crashed over me again, sharper now. I was sitting in her office, surrounded by proof of her lies, piecing together the scraps she had tried to destroy. Part of me wanted to stop, to shove everything back where I found it and pretend I had never seen it. But the need for truth was stronger. Every strip of paper, every transfer slip, every hidden account was another nail in the coffin of the person I thought my mother was. The clock on the wall ticked louder, each second stretching thin with panic. My parents could return any minute. My hands shook as I shoved the slips back into the drawer, slid the notes into my pocket, and tried to scatter the shredded fragments just as I had found them. But my eyes kept darting back to that one line, the one that had shattered everything. This transfer guarantees your daughter's future safety. The words rang in my head like a bell tolling at the edge of town, warning of danger you couldn't yet see but knew was coming. And as I slipped out of the office, locking the door behind me, one thought consumed me. Whatever my mother was protecting me from, it was bigger and darker than I had ever imagined. Was I supposed to thank her for stealing from me if it was for my safety? That single line I pieced together from the shredded letter would not leave me alone. This transfer guarantees your daughter's future safety. The words spun in my head like a curse. Safety. My mother had gutted my future, drained the fund I had counted on since childhood, lied to my face over and over, and now I was supposed to believe it was all for my protection? Was I supposed to be grateful, to hug her and whisper thank you for keeping me safe while she handed my dreams to someone else? I tried to imagine what safety could mean in this context. Safe from what? Student loans? That was laughable. Safe from disappointment? No, disappointment was all I had left. The only explanation that made sense was darker. Excuses. At home, I avoided my mother as much as possible, barely speaking to her during dinner, retreating to my room the moment I could. Every time she looked at me, I felt a storm of rage and confusion. Did she see me as a daughter? Or as a liability she was trying to manage? But it was one thing to sit with paranoia. It was another to stumble across proof. One afternoon, I came home early from school, the house unusually quiet. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I froze, heart hammering, and crept back down, staying close to the wall. My mother was there, but she wasn't alone. A man's voice, low and firm, floated through the doorway. The director isn't pleased. The last transfer took too long.
My mother's reply was sharp, defensive. I've done everything I was told. Every cent has been moved exactly as instructed. You're being watched more closely now, the man said. Project Phoenix has no tolerance for hesitation. You knew that when you agreed. The words hit me like a punch. She had agreed. She hadn't been forced or tricked. She had chosen this. I pressed a hand to my mouth, barely daring to breathe. The conversation was brief, ending with the scrape of a chair and the sound of the back door closing. I darted up the stairs before my mother could see me, my pulse wild, every nerve in my body on fire. That night, I sat in my room replaying every word. My mother wasn't just tangentially connected. She was actively meeting with these people, following their orders, funneling the money through accounts she controlled. And this wasn't just about mismanagement or sloppy bookkeeping. It was about Project Phoenix, an operation run with the kind of authority that demanded loyalty and punished hesitation. I wanted to confront her right then, to scream until she admitted everything, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of the man's voice, cold and commanding. Maybe it was the realization that if my mother was scared enough to obey, I should be too. For the first time, the word safety didn't sound like a lie. It sounded like a warning. Still, knowing didn't make it easier to bear. Every interaction with her became unbearable theater. When she asked about my homework, I wanted to throw the flash drive on the table and demand happening. Once, on my way home from school, I noticed the same black sedan parked 2 blocks away, engine idling, the driver's face hidden by tinted glass. The next day, I saw what I thought was the same car again, a block closer this time. At night, I swore I heard footsteps outside my window, though when I looked, the street was empty. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was proof that I wasn't just imagining how deep this had gone. Then came the text. It was late, the house quiet, my parents asleep. I sat on my bed with the flash drive plugged into my laptop, scrolling through the spreadsheets again, as if maybe this time the numbers would reveal their secret. My phone buzzed, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I picked it up, expecting a message from a friend, but what I saw froze me in place. Stop before you lose more than your college fund. No name, no number I recognized. Just that one sentence, glowing against the dark screen. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. Someone knew. They knew what I'd been doing, what I had discovered. They knew it was me, not my mother, looking at the files now. And they were warning me, no, threatening me. I stared at the words until my vision blurred, my pulse hammering in my ears. My first instinct was to run to my mother, to shove the phone in her face and demand to know who these people were. But another part of me, the part that had been watching, listening, learning, knew better. She already knew. She had already chosen her side. And as I sat there in the dark, the text burning into my skin, I realized that I wasn't just caught in my mother's betrayal anymore. I was standing in the crosshairs of something much bigger, and the people pulling the strings had just let me know they were watching. The text came from someone who already knew where I was. After that night, the world stopped feeling like the one I had always known. Every step I took felt observed, every shadow seemed longer than it should be, every sound behind me felt like it was aimed at me. That anonymous text wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. I wasn't alone in this. Someone was tracking me. Someone knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. I started noticing things I couldn't unsee. A car lingering at the corner too long, a chatter, 100 small moments unfolding at once. But when I pushed through the sliding doors into the parking lot with my bag of groceries, the air felt different, charged, waiting. That's when I saw him. He stood near the far end of the lot, leaning casually against a silver sedan, his arms crossed. His eyes were fixed on me, not scanning the lot, not pretending to check his phone, just staring. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. I shifted the bag in my arms, tried to act like I hadn't noticed, but his gaze followed me as I walked toward the sidewalk. And then he moved. In 3 strides he was beside me, his presence sharp and undeniable. "Don't panic," he said quietly, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm not here to hurt you." I stopped short, clutching the grocery bag like a shield. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice cracked with fear. He glanced around, scanning the lot as if making sure we weren't being watched. Then he leaned closer. "Your mom doesn't have a choice." The words hit me harder than I expected. For weeks, I had been torn between believing she was a betrayer or a victim. Now this stranger was telling me she was both, that her betrayal was forced, her choices limited. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied me, as if weighing whether I was ready to hear the truth. Finally, he said, "There are people above her, powerful people. They needed someone trustworthy on the inside, someone who wouldn't be suspected. That's your mom. She's their cover." The air felt suddenly thinner, harder to breathe. "So she drained my college fund because of them?" I asked. "Because of Project Phoenix?" He nodded once. "Project Phoenix doesn't tolerate obstacles. She kept you out of it the only way she knew how." Anger surged hot in my chest, clashing with confusion. By lying to me? By stealing from me? That's her idea of protection? The man's expression didn't change. "Sometimes protection looks like betrayal." It was the same phrase the woman outside the credit union had used, the same logic my mother had hidden behind. Hearing it again from someone else made my stomach churn. This wasn't just family drama. This wasn't just my mother's mess. It was a system, a network, something bigger and dumb.
Live your life. But I couldn't. Not after everything I had uncovered. Not after watching my future get stolen, piece by piece. I can't just forget. I need the truth. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed as if he had expected that answer. From inside his jacket, he pulled a folded slip of paper and pressed it into my... "Then you need to see this." I unfolded it with trembling fingers. My breath caught. It was another transfer slip, just like the ones with my mother's signature. But this one was worse. This one had my name on it. The amount was massive, tens of thousands of dollars, moved under my ID, my social security number, my identity. My stomach lurched, the ground tilting under me. It wasn't just that they had stolen from my mother's account, they had stolen me. I looked up at the man, my voice breaking. "What is this? Why is my name on it?" His expression was grim. "Because you're not just a bystander anymore. You're part of it now, whether you like it or not." The grocery bag slipped from my arm, cans clattering against the pavement, but I barely heard them. My hands shook as I clutched the slip, the weight of it crushing down on me. My identity, my future, my very sense of self, it had all been hijacked, turned into a pawn in a game I didn't understand. And as the man walked away, disappearing into the blur of cars and strangers, I realized the nightmare had reached a new level. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken me. It wasn't just my college fund they took. They took me. The slip with my name on it shook something loose inside me. I'd thought the betrayal was already unbearable. My college fund siphoned away, my mother's lies, the hidden meetings, the ominous phrase Project Phoenix. But seeing my own name on that transfer, printed above a sum I never touched, carved a new wound. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about ownership. My identity, my future, my very self had been hijacked and repurposed for something I couldn't fully see yet. I couldn't stop staring at the slip. My social security number, my signature, except it wasn't mine. Forged, precise, convincing. It was me, without laptop, and pulled up every financial record tied to my name. The first punch to the gut came fast. Credit cards I had never applied for, opened in states I had never visited. Accounts with balances in the thousands, transactions for purchases I had never made. One was for medical equipment in another city, another for hotel stays, airline tickets, expensive dinners. My name was everywhere, spread across documents like a ghost version of me was living another life. My hands trembled as I scrolled, each discovery worse than the last. I thought of all the advice teachers gave us about protecting our identities, about watching for fraud, about keeping our information safe. None of that mattered when the fraud wasn't some faceless hacker. It was people who had access, people who knew exactly who I was, people who had already stolen my future fund before they moved on to stealing me. For a moment, despair pinned me down.
My future wasn't just delayed, it was contaminated. Even if I somehow scraped together enough money for school, these accounts would follow me. They'd ruin my credit, my reputation, my chances of starting clean. I felt robbed of control in a way I couldn't explain, like the world had already written me off as someone I had never chosen to be. But despair didn't last. Anger rose up, hotter, sharper, refusing to let me collapse. They had taken everything from me, yes, but I wasn't going to let them keep me quiet. If they thought I would curl up and accept it, they had underestimated me. I started digging into the names connected to the fake accounts. Some I couldn't trace, but others had faint echoes online, references in community forums, whispers in old articles, addresses tied to other families in my town. That was when the realization hit me. I wasn't the only one. The Education Trust had touched more people than I had imagined. Families who had once whispered about lost scholarships, kids who had vanished from the university pipeline without explanation, neighbors who suddenly sold their homes under mysterious circumstances. I had brushed those stories off as bad luck, as the randomness of life. But now, I saw the pattern. We were connected, whether we realized it or not. I needed to find them. At first, I wasn't sure how. I couldn't exactly post a flyer saying, "Has the Education Trust been lived in with love until something broke it?" She ushered me inside quickly, glancing over her shoulder before shutting the door. And then she showed me. File after file. Slips and statements and letters, all marked with the same patterns. Her son's name had been used, just like mine, to funnel money through accounts he never touched. His scholarship had evaporated overnight, his future collapsing before it began. I met more families after that, each one with a story that felt like a twisted reflection of my own. Parents who had watched their children's opportunities vanish, who had discovered debts they never created, who had been too afraid to fight back. They shared their documents with me, their whispers of anger, their stories of humiliation. It was a hidden network of the betrayed, each of us isolated until we realized we weren't alone. The more I listened, the more the truth crystallized. This wasn't random. It was systemic. The Education Trust wasn't a broken program. It was a pipeline, siphoning money and identities from the very kids it claimed to help. And the silence of the community wasn't ignorance. It was fear. One night, as I sat in the living room of a father who had lost everything when his daughter's scholarship disappeared, he leaned close, his voice low. "We tried to go public once," he whispered. "We thought if we showed everything, if we went to the papers, someone would help. But the last dad who did, he trailed off, his eyes dark, haunted. He vanished." The word hung in the air, heavier than anything else I had heard. Vanished. Not arrested, not silenced, not shamed. Gone. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, the faces of the families blurring together in my mind. My mother wasn't just part of a scandal. She was part of something powerful enough to erase people from existence. And as I walked home that night, clutching the slips with my name printed on them, I knew one thing with terrifying certainty. If I kept pushing, I wasn't just risking my future. I was risking my life. If fear kept them silent, maybe rage could make me loud. The word vanished echoed in my mind long after I left that father's living room. Vanished. The way he whispered it told me it wasn't exaggeration. Some bedroom became a war room, every inch of the floor covered with slips, copies, fragments, and handwritten notes. I laid them out in lines and columns, connecting the dots until the picture formed something undeniable. Transfers that spanned years, signatures that matched my mother's hand, accounts that overlapped across families. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to show a pattern. Proof that what was happening to me wasn't isolated. The flash drive for Mrs. Carter became my second weapon. I poured through the spreadsheets again, highlighting the emails with Phoenix.Director, circling every reference to Project Phoenix. I printed them out, double-checked the dates, traced how the transactions matched the transfers on the slips. It was all there. Not polished, not neatly tied with a bow, but real. enough to pierce the silence. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I trusted no one in my family anymore, and most of the parents in town were too broken or too scared to risk more. But I had one ally who had already put herself on the line for me, Mrs. Carter. The next afternoon, I slipped into her classroom after school, the halls already emptying. She looked up from her desk, her expression a mix of surprise and worry. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I don't have a choice," I whispered back. I laid the folders on her desk, the papers spilling out like a confession. "I'm not going to stay quiet. Not anymore." She flipped through the slips, the emails, her face tightening with every page. "This is dangerous," she murmured. "I know." My voice cracked, but the fire behind it held steady. "But if I don't do something, I'll already be gone. They've stolen everything from me, my future, my name. What else is left for them to take?" Her eyes met mine, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she closed the folder and nodded. "If you're serious, you can't just shout into the void. You need a plan." So we made one. The first step was anonymity. If people had vanished for speaking up, then my name couldn't be attached, at least not at first. We decided to scan the documents, piece them together digitally, and release them through anonymous channels. Blogs, forums, maybe even social media accounts that could.
The families I'd met, writing down their stories in their own words. Some were hesitant, others too scared, but a few agreed. Their voices gave the evidence weight, turned numbers into lives. As the days blurred into nights, my exhaustion grew, but so did my determination. Each slip of paper, each recorded story, each file on that flash drive became a weapon in my arsenal. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone they had stolen from. But for every ounce of determination, there was still guilt. I couldn't stop hearing my father's quiet voice, "Leave it alone." Or remembering the shredded letter, "This transfer guarantees your daughter's future safety." What if they really believed they were protecting me? What if exposing the truth meant ripping open something even darker, something I couldn't control? I wrestled with it late at night, staring at the piles of evidence, torn between the daughter who still wanted to believe in her parents and the fighter who knew silence would only chain me to their lies. Guilt gnawed at me, but anger always answered louder. Finally, the plan was ready. The files were scanned, the testimonies typed. Mrs. Carter had arranged a quiet meeting with one of the local reporters. I had scheduled the first online drop for midnight 2 nights later. Everything was lined up, every piece of evidence sharpened into a blade. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining power. But power comes with risk. The night before I was set to release it all, I sat at my desk staring at the glowing screen, the folder of files open like a bomb ready to go off. My hands hovered over the keyboard, rehearsing what I would write, how I would frame it. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow, the silence would shatter. That's when I heard it. A knock on my bedroom door. "Come in," I called, forcing my voice steady. The door creaked open, and my mother stepped inside. Her face was unreadable. Calm, but too calm. The kind of calm that hides a storm. She closed the door behind her, and the air in the room grew heavier. For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes sweeping over the papers spread across my desk, the glow of my laptop screen. Then she looked.
Weeks, digging in the shadows, convinced I was outsmarting her, staying one step ahead.
But the way she said it, the certainty in her voice made it clear she had seen me all along. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence pressed down heavy, thicker than any scream. Then she crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked older than I'd ever noticed before. Her face drawn, the skin under her eyes shadowed with years of exhaustion. "You think I don't notice when my own daughter is rifling through my office? When files go missing? When you're sneaking out at night?" Her voice was low, steady, but it cracked on the word daughter. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Then why didn't you stop me?" Her eyes closed, and when she opened them again, the mask I'd grown used to, the calm, silent woman who never explained, was gone. In its place was something raw, something broken. "Because I knew this moment was coming," she whispered. Her words made my skin prickle. I wanted to demand answers, to shout, to throw the slips in her face and force her to admit everything. But before I could, she spoke again. "You think I wanted this?" Her voice rose, edged with a tremor. "You think I enjoyed watching you work yourself to the bone for a future I already knew was compromised? You think I don't know how many people I've hurt?" I stared at her, anger and grief colliding in my chest. "Then why, Mom? Why did you do it? Why take my money? Why lie?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring as if the metal itself might hold the words she didn't want to say. Finally, she exhaled, the sound sharp and heavy. "Project Phoenix," she said. "That's the name you've seen, isn't it?" The room tilted. Hearing her say it out loud felt like the ground opening beneath me. I nodded slowly. "They came to me years ago," she continued. "The Education Trust. It was never about helping kids. That was just the mask. The real program was Phoenix. Money funneled through fake scholarships, redirected into places we weren't allowed to question. They needed someone local, someone respectable, someone who wouldn't raise suspicion."
Voice trembling. "You let me believe it was for me while you were destroying other people's lives." Her face crumpled, but she didn't look away. "I was trying to protect you. Do you understand? They're powerful, untouchable. The families who fought back, who tried to expose them, you've seen what happens. They disappear. I couldn't let that happen to you." Anger surged hot in my veins. "So you sacrificed them instead? You decided my future mattered more than theirs? Do you know how many kids lost everything because of you?" She flinched like I'd struck her. "I know," she whispered. "Every name, every family, I know, and I carry it with me every day." Her voice broke then, and tears finally slipped down her cheeks. "But if it came down to them or you, I chose you. I would always choose you." Her words twisted the knife deeper. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that all her betrayal had been some twisted form of love. But love shouldn't feel like chains. Love shouldn't cost this much. "I don't want to be protected this way," I said, my voice hard. "Not if it means living on the backs of other people's stolen futures." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Her touch felt foreign now, like it belonged to someone else. "Please," she begged, her voice ragged. "Don't release what you found. If you do, they'll come for you. They won't stop. You think you're strong, but you don't understand the power they hold." Her desperation filled the room, raw and suffocating. For a moment, doubt flickered in me. Was she right? Was I walking into a fire I couldn't control? I thought of the father who whispered vanished. I thought of the black sedan, the anonymous text, the stranger in the parking lot. Maybe I was already too far gone. But then I thought of the kids who had sat in guidance counselors' offices, clutching acceptance letters they'd never get to use. I thought of the families I'd met, the mothers and fathers with boxes of proof and stories of loss. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who believed her future was safe, only to have it ripped away in silence. "I can't stop," I said finally, my voice steady now. "Not when I know the truth." Her eyes widened, had been erased. And as I lay in the dark, the timer ticking down in the background, I knew there was no turning back. The truth was coming, whether my mother wanted it or not. The morning my secret post went live, the world exploded, and so did my family. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the timer on my laptop screen, counting down toward midnight. It felt like a fuse burning its way toward dynamite. When the clock finally hit 0, I lay frozen in bed, staring at the glow from the desk. The files, the slips, the emails, the testimonies, were gone from my hard drive. They were loose now, uploaded, scheduled, and spreading into corners of the internet I couldn't call back. My heart thundered as I whispered into the dark, "It's done." The morning air was heavy with anticipation I couldn't name. I dressed for school like any other day, but my stomach churned. At breakfast, my mother moved around the kitchen with careful precision, her eyes shadowed.
She didn't say a word, but the silence between us was louder than any fight we had ever had. My father shuffled through the newspaper like always, but his hands trembled, the paper rustling too much. They knew. Maybe not the details yet, but they could feel it coming. By the time I stepped outside, my phone was already buzzing. Text after text lit up the screen. Links, screenshots, frantic messages. Is this you? Have you seen this? Oh my God. My chest tightened as I opened one. It was the site I had used to drop the files, the anonymous post I had crafted in the dead of night. The headline glared back at me. The Education Trust, a decade of lies, corruption, and stolen futures. The evidence I had uploaded was all there, laid out for the world to see. Spreadsheets tying the transfers together, slips with my mother's signature, emails from Phoenix.director, testimonies from families whose lives had been broken. My words at the top, sharp and unflinching. This isn't charity, this is theft, and it's been happening for years. Here is the proof. By lunch period, the story had already spread beyond my control. The post had been shared on forums, retweeted by accounts with thousands of followers, posted on Facebook groups full of angry parents. Local journalists
From the wall. Neighbors stood on their lawns whispering, pointing. My mother's name, once spoken with respect, was now cursed with suspicion. The woman who had chaired the scholarship committee, the woman who had once been trusted, her reputation shattered overnight. I should have felt triumphant, and in a way I did. Justice was closer than it had ever been. The truth was no longer buried, but the taste of victory was bitter. I saw the way my mother sat at the kitchen table that evening, her shoulders slumped, her face hollow. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like someone crushed under the weight of secrets she could no longer carry. And still, I couldn't forgive her. That night, as I lay in bed scrolling through the chaos online, I felt both powerful and small. My post had changed everything, but it had also painted a target on my back. If they had erased people before, what would they do to me now that their secrets were out in the open? Near midnight, I got my answer. The street outside my window was quiet, the glow of the lamppost pooling faintly on the pavement. And then I saw him, the man from the parking lot, the one who had handed me the slip with my name. He stood across the street, his figure steady in the shadows, watching the house. My breath caught, my pulse racing as I pulled the curtain back just enough to keep him in sight. He didn't move. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just stood there, waiting. And as the minutes stretched into hours, one thought clawed at me. The truth was out, but now the fight was coming to my doorstep. When he stepped out of the shadows, I knew my life would never be normal again. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just stood across the street, a silhouette against the lamplight, steady as stone. My breath came fast and shallow as I pushed the curtain back with trembling fingers. For weeks he had been the ghost circling my story, the man in the parking lot, the one who slipped me proof I wasn't supposed to see. Now he was here, and the way he waited told me he wasn't leaving until I came to him. The house was silent. My parents long since retreated into uneasy sleep. I slipped on my sneakers, tucked the folder of slips under my arm, and crept out the back door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The night air was sharp, slicing against my skin as I crawled through me. Enemies. Allies. It sounded like a war, not the life of a girl who had just wanted to go to college. And maybe that was the point. I wasn't just a girl anymore. "They'll come after me," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound strong. "They'll try," he agreed. "But you've shifted the ground under their feet. They can't erase this the way they erased others. It's too big now, too loud. And once the fire spreads, even Phoenix can't smother it." I tightened my grip on the folder, the weight of my choices pressing down. "Why are you helping me?" For the first time, something almost like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because I used to be where you are. And I learned the hard way that silence keeps them powerful. You've already done what I couldn't." He slipped a card into my hand, plain, unmarked, just a phone number written in black ink. "Call if you need to disappear for a while. Or if you decide to fight harder." Then he stepped back into the shadows, his figure swallowed by the night, leaving me standing alone under the lamplight, clutching both the folder and the card like lifelines.
The firestorm hit harder than even he predicted. Within days, my anonymous post had spread across every major news outlet. Reporters dug into the files, corroborating details, interviewing families. Local corruption stories rarely made it past county borders, but this one had teeth. National anchors spoke the words Project Phoenix on primetime television. Senators called for investigations. For the first time in years, it wasn't just whispers in small-town kitchens. It was headlines. And my mother was at the center of it. I watched her face on the evening news, her photo plastered alongside words like fraud, scheme, and misconduct. The woman who had once been introduced at town meetings as an example of leadership was now branded as a cog in a corrupt machine. Investigators swarmed our town, subpoenas delivered to doors, interviews conducted in hushed tones. My mother didn't fight it. She didn't deny it. She simply carried herself with the hollow weight of someone who knew the truth had finally caught up. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Watching her unravel under the public eye was painful in ways I hadn't expected. She had chosen
A machine that had thrived on silence was suddenly choking on me. And me? I became something I never thought I'd be. A whistleblower. At first, I stayed anonymous, my identity hidden behind the files. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and soon enough, reporters found me. My story was splashed across screens and newspapers, my face grainy from yearbook photos. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely steady. The fear that had once silenced me had burned away, replaced by something stronger. Scholarship offers began to arrive, not from the corrupted trust fund that had betrayed me, but from universities, organizations, even individuals who had read my story and wanted to help. Strangers who believed in the girl who had refused to stay quiet. I had lost the fund my parents had promised me, but in its place, I had something purer. Opportunity rebuilt not on lies, but on truth. The night before I accepted my scholarship, I sat on my bed, the folder of slips still beside me, though the world no longer needed them to believe me. My life wasn't normal, and it never would be again. But maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was transformation. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who had cried in her room the night her father told her the money was gone, the one who thought her future had vanished in a single sentence. That girl had felt powerless, but the girl staring into the dark now, on the other side of fire and betrayal, she was something else entirely. Maybe losing my college fund had been the best tuition life could buy, because it had taught me that silence is the most expensive currency of all, and breaking it was the only way forward. And as I packed my bag for the future I had reclaimed, one question echoed louder than all the rest. What would you risk to uncover the truth? If your parents ever hid something this big from you, would you forgive them or expose the truth? I really want to hear what you'd do, so drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe